Before you is the tomb of the great Sith Lord, Marka Ragnos, a half-breed who possessed tremendous strength, both physically and in the Force. Ragnos held power for over a century, using his cunning to turn his enemies against each other. His death left a great vacuum of power.
As we near the time of the Great Hyperspace War, there's one name that must be known, that acts as the foundation of why the war even occurred in the first place. Briefly mentioned in the previous entry, we'll focus on him now. That being is Marka Ragnos.
I shall not be denied.
By the Force.
Marka Ragnos.
A mere Jedi child will not undo my return.
That's Jedi Knight, Ragnos.
You will kneel before me, Jedi.
And it was his death that caused the inevitable to occur. There are a few Sith who can be said to rival the achievements of King Adas, but amongst the various contenders from Palpatine, the Sith Emperor Vicious, Scree Khan, there was one who was the closest. Marka Ragnos was born centuries prior to 5000 BBY. As far as we know, he was not a rare anomaly that shaped galactic history, but instead, he was a Sith-human hybrid, a direct descendant from a dark Jedi who was exiled from the Republic during the 100-Year Darkness. And like all Sith during that time, he was powerful, conniving, a true force of will and nature, but there was a rare quality to him. The guy actually knew his limitations, yet worked to subvert them to ensure his own greater power as the reigning Dark Lord of the Sith began to wane. An important skill to have, given that we know once a Dark Lord starts to lose power, it's not long before the Sith decide it's time to shove a boot up their own asses and start a battle royale for supremacy. Ugh. And like all the other Sith, he was also cast into the conflagration. During this time, his primary rival was a Sith Lord named Simus. With the two of them having power struggles going back a full century, starting in 5200 BBY. As both were considered the strongest Sith Lords of their time, so when the two tired of beating around the bush, it would be Simus who would challenge Ragnos for the title of Dark Lord of the Sith. Now, I would wish to tell you how this duel went, the powers likely thrown, the skills of the blade and brutality of it all, but we don't have any details. But we do know that Simus got ahead of himself completely, before Ragnos gave him the Queen of Hearts treatment. And just for a note, for everyone who considered Darth Maul coming back to life after being cut in half to be ridiculous,
Jedi, I have been waiting for you.
well, you will absolutely hate Simus, because he managed to survive being beheaded.
Over here. Oh, no, not that go. Hold on. Ow! No. Ow!
I'm not even joking, the mad lad clung to life so heavily that it would make Darth Sion green with envy, as he managed to preserve himself by encasing his head in a crystal sphere. I mean, granted, he needed to be created around everywhere, but death came for the guy, and he said no.
No.
After taking up the title, one might think that Marka Ragnos would be able to just sit back on his throne, and everyone would just obey him. Now, if you thought that, then go look at the other entries on the Sith to understand just how insane that notion is. No, you see, he did the time-honored tradition of kicking everyone's collective asses.
I'm the conductor of the poop train!
I'm not joking. Marka Ragnos saw King Adas' conquest from 23,000 years ago and said, bet, before going on a series of ruthless campaigns that repainted the sands of Korriban red again. But while King Adas saw the various Sith warlords as personal affronts to his being and practice dummies, Marka Ragnos decided to go full puppet master with this whole thing. Through subtle manipulation, prodding, misdirection, and maneuvering that even Palpatine would be proud of, he managed to pit the various enemies and warlords against each other, weakening them to the point that he could swoop in and collect them all as if he was a daggone Pokemon master. The amount of damage caused by these actions was basically the Mad Doctrine, mutually assured destruction, taking place in real time. Only no one realized that he was the nuke. And in the aftermath, Ragnos had no more threats to the throne, because when you're dealing with a pile of warlord corpses, who the hell's going to be left to challenge you? Thus began the iron-fisted rule that lasted over a century. The foundations of the Golden Age were never easy. Even with all the competitors in the dirt, order had to be maintained. But one of Ragnos' greatest strengths was that he was a scholar. He learned from history and drew from it for inspiration. As the Jedi exiles had formed a council under Ajunta Pall, in which to maintain control, to stop ambitions from growing too great so that they would destroy what they intended to build, Ragnos would do the same. He called upon 10 Sith Lords to serve, likely taken from what remaining impressive warlords that had wisely joined Ragnos, rather than oppose him. But surprisingly enough, amongst those who would be on his council was in fact his old rival Simus. Headless, but still very much alive. He had gone to become a greatly respected council member. He had been advising Marka Ragnos for over a century, suggesting that after losing his body, he saw the light, we could say, and realized that it would be better to be in Ragnos' favor than to be against him. During this time, Marka Ragnos would create various items that would become artifacts for later millennia. The first was the Epistle of Marka Ragnos, which likely contained information on his rise, how he was able to manipulate his foes into destroying themselves. But surprisingly enough, he didn't take a personal holocron, instead utilizing Tulak Hord's own to record lessons, a holocron that Marka Ragnos would take to the grave. But during this time, one could say the Sith Lords became more wary of any attempts to overthrow him. After all, he may have won against the various warlords, but they were still Sith. Any form of weakness would see him deposed, which makes sense for what the next two items he would create. The first would be gauntlets that he utilized to augment his strength in the Force. This would allow Marka Ragnos to retain his power even as he continued to age. After all, one must remember that the guy was old by the time he took over, far older than what a Sith should have been capable of. So one could imagine that he was starting to lose his edge. Ironically enough, the next object will also hint towards this, with it being the Scepter of Ragnos, a powerful dark side artifact that doubled as a weapon, with it containing his sword, which should he require it. It acted as both a symbol of office, but also as a means in which to further enhance his power. You see, the artifact had the ability to siphon and store dark side energy to dramatically increase one's own power, if known how to use properly. It can also release that energy to make ordinary beings force sensitive, actively forcing the biology of the person to undergo a massive change, and the energy can also be used as an attack via energy blasts. So while his might may not have diminished quickly, he was becoming diminished all the same, and needed to augment his strength to ensure that none would challenge him and throw the Sith into chaos and destruction. Now, of course, after that, I painted a picture of a man who was starting to lose his power. But do not mistake, Marka Ragnos was still ridiculously strong during this time. And so that's when the next event came. One that was very unexpected. Where you see, sometime after the start of Ragnos' century of rule, he and the Sith Council would be partitioned. It came from the world named Madrias, a fertile agri world on the outer edges of the Sith Empire, in the future Truorlan sector of the Outer Rim. This world, despite the food it provided, was trivial to say the least. Not even worth anyone's time, save for the fact that it was under Lord Dramath's domain. So any petition from the planet would have been believed to come from said Sith Lord. But instead, they'd be given a surprise. You see, the petition came not from the Sith Lord himself, but from a 13-year-old boy by the name of Tenebrae. Now, this boy had come to ask for training in the ways of the Sith arts, and for recognition as the ruler of his father's domain, as he had managed to completely destroy Lord Dramath. Had this child approached anyone else, there would have been likely two outcomes. The first would have been the child would be deemed a threat and killed on the spot, or at least attempted to be killed. The second would be acceptance as an apprentice, believing that they would be able to use the power that he possessed as their own. But Ragnos was no idiot. No, he took one look into that child's black as void eyes and knew precisely the type of creature he was dealing with. A rarity, an anomaly, the type that would change everything. And so he declined to take Tenebrae up as an apprentice, but he was still impressed by Tenebrae's power and ambition. Without even giving a speck of training, Ragnos named him the ruler of Madrias and bestowed upon him the rank of Sith Lord and a new name, Vitiate. Such a move was incredibly wise, for it kept Vitiate from gaining more rapid paths to power, and kept him from the political theater, where he could dominate the minds of lesser Sith, then eventually overwhelm Marka Ragnos himself due to proximity. Instead, Vitiate would spend the next 100 years learning from his father's books and having to figure things out himself, thus severely hampering his abilities in the future, and honing what few he already possessed. After this situation with Vitiate, Marka Ragnos would go on to continue ruling the Sith. This would be a surprising period of relative stability and power within the old Sith Empire, with the Empire having expanded to 120 worlds within the Stygian caldera. Though brutal, it maintained the strength of the Empire to continue for another 100 years with the right leader. Eventually, new Sith Lords would take the places on the Sith Council. Amongst them were Gord Galram, Borak Mule, Ludo Kresh, and Naga Sadao, along with Simmons retaining his position. This would be the makeup of the 5 most prominent Sith on the Council, and it would be the Council that would set the fate of the Sith Empire. Where you see, after ruling for a century, for some reason, either because he reached the limits of how much Sith sorcery and alchemy could extend his life, or even because he had taken in so much Force energy over decades to keep himself strong, Marka Ragnos would eventually die, but not before giving what could be considered a warning. He had often spoken about the 100-Year Darkness, about the Jedi and how the exiles were defeated because of the schism. The warning was not to let ambitions cloud them, to not go after the Republic or the Jedi because the Sith would lose, and he knew this on some level, but it would be for naught. While the legacy of Marka Ragnos would continue on for millennia, the Golden Age that he had worked to create would be forever lost, as no Sith that came after would come close to restoring what was lost.